Okay, good morning. Stan Stahl here with Secure the Village. We have our monthly Secure the Village webinar, and this month we're going to be talking on the legal side of things again with our guest Jordan Fischer. First, just a couple words about us. We're Secure the Village. We're a community-based response to the cybercrime and privacy crisis with the objective of turning everybody, and we mean everybody, into cyber guardians. That's from the boardroom to the living room. We got a lot of work to do if we want to meet our vision of a cyber secure global village. Our information security management webinars are the second Thursday of every month from 10 to 11, and they're designed to really provide real world guidance in the subject of how do you manage your way through, how do you lead your way through information security, cyber privacy, that whole set of questions. That's what we're about. So we're very happy that you're here with us today. And we'll be speaking, as I said, with Jordan Fischer, who's an attorney with the firm of Beckage. Jordan, welcome to our webinar, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Dan. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. I love the organization. I love the message. The cyber guardians is just so important in today's environment. So more than happy to be here. So a little bit about myself. I work at Beckage. I'm the global privacy team lead there. I really lead the global initiatives, working with a lot of multinational companies to address their global legal concerns in security and privacy. And as many of you on this call can likely understand, while laws have borders, our data, technology, cyber threats, vulnerabilities, our privacy concerns no longer have borders, and data is flowing amongst so many different jurisdictions. And so where I really work with a lot of organizations is to stand up privacy and security programs that organically fit within their business infrastructure, in their industry, and the types of services, goods, products they're providing, but also addresses a wide variety of regulatory obligations. I also work a lot in the incident response space, helping to address international breaches. We have a very strong incident response team at Beckage. And then we also do a fair amount of privacy and security litigation as well. So really being able to fully service clients across the wide variety of legal concerns that might come up in their data and technology ecosystem. In addition to my private practice, I'm also a faculty member of the Thomas R. Klein School of Law at Drexel University, where I teach a wide variety of EU and US-based cybersecurity and data privacy courses. I'm also a lecturer at UC Berkeley, where I teach cybersecurity. I'm a one-trick pony. It's all cyber, it's all privacy. But that's really, I really love the academic side. It's allowed me to delve into the question of why, how we should be thinking about this, more on that abstract side. And it's also given me a lot of opportunities to collaborate with various different disciplines in the academic space. So I work a lot with technology, computer science, et cetera, to develop legally compliant solutions, conduct research in this space. I'm also a Fulbright specialist, so that is under the Department of State, where I've received funding to go abroad to help to create collaborative environments, both in the academic and the private sector in cybersecurity and data privacy. So it's a really cool opportunity to represent the US in those settings. So that's me in a nutshell.
There's a lot. That's a big nutshell, if you will.
And I sleep about 1 hour a day. Don't worry.
That's good. Sleep is important. Rest is important to do this. But yeah, part of what I think you and I are very much aligned with is this whole idea that cybersecurity, privacy, these things are a collaborative matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not go down a silo and okay, there's your answer. It's more let's expand, let's get the silos intersecting, and that's where we'll find our answers that way. I've always liked that as we've gotten to know each other.
And that's what I love about Secure the Village, because when I sit down to address a security and privacy matter, I need to be talking to technology. I need to be talking to the business side. I need to be talking to the executive leadership, because this really is impacting so many different areas of a business. And the solution's not legal, the solution's not technical, the solution's not business. It's really a hybrid solution where we're going to take into consideration where are we growing the business? What risk position do we want to have? Some businesses are in a risky industry. So you're going to take on risk because you need to accelerate your growth, or that's just the industry that you're in. Well, that's okay, but we need to make sure that tech is being developed in a way and used in a way that's going to support that position, and
Mhm.
that legal is, as best as possible, putting you in the position that's defensible in within that environment. So I love the opportunities when I get to sit down with people from a lot of different disciplines. Secure the Village is a great opportunity to do that, which is why I really love this organization.
Yeah, you and I, again, very analogous there. One of the things we find in our security practice, our management services, is, I mean, there's only so much we can do in terms of, okay, how do we slice and dice the management? How do we slice and dice the technology and things like that? But we're always coming up against the question, okay, let's get the lawyers involved. Is what we're doing the appropriate defensible thing? We, on the one side, we want to make sure we're defensible, defendable, there.
Mhm.
We also want to make sure that we're not spending any more of our clients' resources than are absolutely necessary to do that. So just
And that's
how
a
do you
big thing.
intersect those? Yeah.
Yeah, the resources, I was just talking about this ironically with my students at Berkeley the other day, because they say a lot of them are practitioners in cybersecurity, and we were sort of talking about the cyber environment. And so many times clients will um, sort of be very negative on spending resources. And by spending resources, I mean both monetarily and personnel to
Hmm.
secure your environment, because it's not a profit generator per se, as we currently sit, or at least the perception is that it's not a profit driver. I have hopes that that's going to change, and that we as consumers will start to choose more secure and privacy oriented platforms. But I can understand in the current environment right now, it's not necessarily a profit driver. And the other challenge is we could do everything. We can have the security in place, we can do all the right things, and we still could have a breach,
Hmm.
right? Because that's the world that we live in. And so it really takes a lot of different perspectives to get the entire organization on the same plane as to why we need to spend resources and devoting the right resources. And I will admit, when your lawyer walks in and says you've got to do something, there's just a added level of sort of credibility to that, whether it's fair or not, that really can help organizations to prioritize appropriately.
Hmm. Yeah, and I agree. It is that prioritization that becomes
Mhm.
so valuable here. Doing it a little bit before we move on and get into the substance of
Yes.
the webinar. Just how did you find your way into law? I mean, did you grow up wanting to, you know, defend people, or yeah, were you going to be the female Perry Mason, or right?
So I was really fortunate. My father's an attorney, owned his own practice. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So really sort of had that on the ground viewpoint on law. And because my dad was an attorney, he had a lot of connections, and I always sort of had an interest towards the law. I think that I sort of had this sense that I was going to go into law. But I will say one of the best things that happened was at my high school, they allowed you the last 3 weeks of your high school to do a vocational experience. And my father set up an experience where I spent a week with a female judge, a week with a female DA, and a week with a female private attorney. And it was fantastic because, one, I saw very strong women who were leading in this field, who were doing fantastic legal work, working in very tricky areas. Um, and it really exposed me to, one, the various things you can do when you have a law degree, and two, really that as women, we can be leaders in this space. And I think that's a narrative that I took through all of my education and continue today. I'm a huge advocate for supporting diversity in a lot of these different areas. Having started and run my own law firm, that was a women-owned law firm. Beckage is a women-owned law firm. I think it's a huge thing that we can focus on. And so that was really my introduction to it. And then I just had these fantastic mentors that are still in my life today that continue to encourage me to sort of go that law school route. And then I actually I'll say stumbled into data privacy and security law because I've always been very interested in international law. I have lived abroad numerous times. I speak French fluently. So when I went to law school, I was, the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, one-owl law student saying, I'm going to practice international law, not knowing that that is like a wide breadth of practice and that I really needed to narrow that in. And I took an EU law course, really loved European Union law, loved delving into it, had an opportunity after law school to clerk on the Court of Justice, which is the highest court within the EU system. And I was there in 2013. And for anyone on the call who knows about the evolution of data privacy law, 2013 is really when the topic of updating the data privacy directive to what we now have as the GDPR really started. And we already had the Google Spain case on our horizon. Now, I wasn't there when that decision came out, that was in 2014, but a lot of the work that I did was in data privacy. And we actually had multiple opinions I worked on related to either pharmaceutical privacy concerns or website privacy concerns that really led to the Google Spain case, which then was a feeder into the GDPR. And that is really where I took off from there, getting that EU introduction to data privacy, and then recognizing the need to have a US focus on that as well. So I really, it's a little bit different because I really came from it from an EU perspective, which I think has a different connotation than if you grow up in the US system.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly see that as a practitioner. Again, I'm as a non-lawyer, but as a management practitioner, I'm kind of comfortable working my way through breach disclosure laws, all the kind of privacy stuff we've got here. I won't touch anything with GDPR without having a lawyer sitting by my side. It's a different framework, and I just don't want to have things slip through the cracks. But I do want to loop back before we jump forward. I want to go back to what you said about diversity and all. I too, I'm a big believer in that. Very earlier in my career, when I was still a math professor, I had the great pleasure of teaching both at Smith College and Mount Holyoke College, top women's colleges, and got a real strong sense during that part of my life of just how the world sees women in the workforce is different. It's not quite the same set of things, and particularly I think when you're looking at the diversity, equality, and all of that today, with the need on the one side for so many cybersecurity practitioners. I mean, there's a shortfall of a couple of million at this point, as I understand it, and the opportunity for these entry-level positions in that space don't require college educations. So they require more on-the-job training ability, that sort of thing. So one of the things we've done at Secure the Village, and I say this to all of the people in the audience, if any of you are involved in organizations that have apprentice programs or intern programs, that sort of thing, we want to hear from you, because we have an invitational working group that is the whole Secure the Village model. Let's get people together. Let's get us all talking about the situation and our involvement in it, and how can we make it better? How can we go get both more people in cybersecurity, but that also translates to more diversity in cybersecurity. So those two things my perspective, go hand in hand. So I'm very much supportive of what you're saying about women in the field, women in all fields. I mean,
and I think it's even more important as we see more and more job opportunities, more and more leadership opportunities that are going to require at least a conversational knowledge in this space. So even if you don't have a heavy technical background, you as a business person need to be able to speak some of the jargon. And so even just recognizing that STEM and these issues are going to intersect more and more with every facet of what we do, it's so important. And I'm a huge advocate for working with younger children. I have many nieces and nephews, and I think to myself all the time, they're provided with Chromebooks in second grade, but they're not taught basic security and privacy principles. And the fact that while that Chromebook can open you up to so many unique opportunities and experiences, and candidly, it's allowed us to continue to educate people in the last year, it has some negative aspects to it. And I think the earlier we can start to get students aware of those, then we spark interest. And not all of them are going to go into a traditional cyber career, but just an understanding is just going to be so valuable across the board. So completely agree. And one of the organizations that I can recommend, especially if you're looking for ones that work with girls, is the Girl Scouts has cybersecurity merit badges. And we
Mhm.
worked with some local Girl Scout troops to teach them coding by using different colored beads to make necklaces and bracelets. And they're learning very simple things, but that's the best way I have found to explain very simple coding principles to a 5-year-old. And guess what? It sticks, because when they realize they can read their name on their bracelet in their pink and green and blue and whatever colors they chose, they really like it. It engages them. It gets their brain going in that
Yeah.
direction.
Well, and that's good as well from the how do we train logic,
Mhm.
that kind of thinking, rigorous thinking in general. Uh, and what you're describing, the Girl Scouts program, there's a nonprofit we work with, SYNED,
Mhm.
SYNED, that's in that space as well. Where there's so much opportunity here. I got somebody just chatted in. Oh,
Love the
yeah,
Girl Scout program.
one of
Yes.
our attendees just texted, love the Girl Scout program. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'll put this out to anybody listening. I'm always happy to speak to any organization and give my perspective. I
Yeah.
find that the legal perspective is not one that's always included in all those conversations. Partially, I think because it's still evolving, and really it's new in some sense to have a lawyer talking about technology, but I think it's really valuable. And so I will put that out there. I'm always a resource to volunteer in any way I can to get the word out there.
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the things I see in our future at Secure the Village, and you'll connect to it as well as we grow. There's the Girl Scouts here in LA that we're
Mhm.
connected to. They're part of our leadership group. And somebody else on the colleges, who's volunteered for Girl Scouts and helps brownies, daisies, and juniors get their cyber
Yes.
badges. This is both those chats are from two of the women who are on the panel
Yes.
attendees, both friends. You ready to go to work? And
Yes.
I mean, this is great. We could talk all hour on this, but we did promise the audience that we
Mhm.
would talk about some cyber law stuff. So why don't we jump in? And I just put up a bunch of everything
Buzzwords.
from acronyms to words. This is we just went through a rather tumultuous year uh, between. I mean, it's hard to think that this year started uh, last year, 2020
Mhm.
started. Uh, there was no pandemic. You know, uh, I won't get into the politics at the beginning of the year. They kind of mirrored the politics at the end of the year, but it's been one hell of a crazy year. And these are just, you know, just the political and physical health aspects, all these security things as well. Let's jump into what happened last year, Dorothy.
It's a very lofty question. So my biggest takeaway from 2020 is that we all in 2019 thought we were very technical and, oh my gosh, look at all this technology that we have in our lives. And then I think 2020 proved how there was still a lot of our lives that wasn't technical, and that much more of it was actually going to move on to that digital space. You had people who had never done a Zoom call who now are very comfortable and easy to go on Zoom. We have sharing of a lot more information back and forth in the digital sphere in ways that we've never seen before. It'll be really interesting to see how this either, increases the use of digital platforms going forward, or if we end up migrating off of those once we're able to see everyone in person again. And so I think, both in the private sphere, but then also in the business sphere, we really moved a lot more digital, which created a lot of vulnerabilities, I think. One was that I don't know if all of the platforms were prepared for this mass migration. I mean, I think Zoom is a great case study in that. Obviously has done a lot of work to improve its security and privacy posture. But in those early days, it was a bit of a wild west when you were on Zoom dealing with privacy and security concerns, all the way up to many school districts determining that they would not continue to use Zoom as a platform to offer their studies. And then I think we also saw a very distracted populace, and a distracted populace is more vulnerable to phishing scams, vishing scams, schmishing scams. I mean, there's so many different scams out there. And unfortunately, we saw a huge uptick in that. The ton that, sadly try to use the various going-ons in the world, mostly the pandemic, to try to get people to click on things. This is the coronavirus task force giving you information, just download this PDF into your system, and really created a lot more vulnerabilities for businesses. And those were created not only because of those phishing scams and because we're distracted and because we're all working at home, where we have dogs and kids and family members who are moving around. So we're just not as tuned in to one thing like we would be at the office, but we're also using our personal devices. Looking back at March, we had companies who didn't have laptops to give to their people, and they were doing business on their phone, their personal phone. And so I think 2020 to me was a big awakening to the fact that while we all had this sort of perception that we could very easily spin up remote environments, I can work from home, it's fine. We realized it's not just opening a laptop and sort of starting to type away. There's a lot more considerations. And I think it's going to be really interesting to sort of see the return to work and what sticks and what doesn't stick. Because I think in some ways, all of us have gotten quite used to sitting in our homes with our PJs on every day and might not want to take on that hour-long commute. But at the same time, I think all of us have recognized there is a value to in-person. There is a value to some level of connecting in person. So I'm really going to be interested from a humanitarian perspective of sort of how that ends up evolving and where technology is going to play a role in that. We also at the firm saw this sort of wave of data shaming that was coming on with ransomware attacks. Typically a ransomware attack might happen, and if you're able, in the past, our biggest thing was, do you have backups? Do you maintain viable backups? How quickly can you spin up your backup environment to get back to work? But what we started seeing in 2020, I mean, we've seen this for a number of years, but really saw an uptick in 2020 was the use of data shaming, meaning even if you can spin back up your environment, if you don't pay the ransomware, I'm going to dump your data on the internet. And for some organizations, hospitals, very sensitive websites, et cetera, the fact that they can't get into their system is a huge problem. But if they have a backup, they would able to. They don't need to get into that system. They can use their backup to get back up and running. But their data being out on the web, that is actually more damaging than anything else that could happen. So we're seeing that, and it's really actually tying into this increasing threat, because you have to be thinking not only are my systems protected, but what is the data that I have and how sensitive is that if it does leak out into the web? And then adding to all of this, is the increasing emphasis by OFAC and that decision that you shouldn't be making ransomware payments to terrorist organizations and other organizations on the OFAC list, and really putting this like heightened environment on these cyber attacks. So 2020 was certainly an interesting year. And I think we're still seeing the fallout from there, and it's hard to sort of get that perspective. I'm sure in 2 years, looking back at 2020, we'll have many, many more things that we can say about it.
Oh yeah, I'm on the same page with you on that one. Yeah, I found when I first saw the ransomware, okay, now we're going to release your information if you don't pay us. And it was a law firm in New York that dealt with A-list clients. And of course, they may not be the most interesting people in the world, but they're the people the more that most people are interested about. Oh, how much did she get on that last contract? How much did, all of that sort of stuff, and who's dating whom, and that craziness in the among the A-list. But that's where I saw, and it was like, that was a game changer, because to your point, one does one's best to keep the cyber criminals off your systems. And, some do better than others, of course, but there was always this sense that, okay, if they got on and we had good backups, all right, we might be down a day or two or three, whatever. First, that fell apart as soon as now we're holding your information for ransom. We're going to release it publicly. But then also started seeing numbers like 6 figures just to rebuild your systems. So don't think you're getting off free or at low cost, those sorts of things, and you're still down. I remember like the first kind of attack we saw, and this goes back 15, 18 years ago, was a law firm that was, their network was down for 3 days, and it was about 60 attorneys. So you
Mhm.
start doing the billable hours times 3 days times 60.
Oh, I don't want to be in that law firm when that's
Yeah,
happening.
you're talking a serious amount of money there. And that's with backups, with the ability to recover. So there's all of those kinds of things as well. Uh,
Well, I think it
every,
becomes even trickier because, we all want collaboration and integration and ways to, like, I don't want to have to sign into 4 different accounts to get my work done, right? So we have
right.
single sign on and all of those things, which, from a usability standpoint, are very valuable. The fact that I'm sharing everything and I have, everything in this environment and I'm messaging people on Teams or I'm using Google Hangouts or I'm doing all this stuff is great from a usability perspective. But sometimes it means that if like one system, like if one thing goes down, it takes your entire infrastructure down.
Mhm,
And so I think building redundancy and resiliency into your system, not only in can I access my data, but how do I spin back up and start working again very quickly? Is it another system? Is it, and I'm not saying go out and buy a widget. I'm just saying sit down and think. If I couldn't access my email today, is there a backup email that I could quickly spin up?
mhm,
Do I feel confident that I don't want to be making those decisions real time? I'd rather make them now, understand the cost of that. Is it going to be a cost per user? Do I have a relationship where I can call them? And again, not purchasing it now, but just being ready to make that purchase if you need to.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I know that again, it's, and these things, to me, they're all interrelated. I mean, I'm just looking up at the screen, some of the things we've not talked about: cyber espionage, the SolarWinds attack.
Mhm.
All right. You really do a good job. You're doing all the Center for Internet Security 20, and you
You've
follow
done
this
your supply chain due
religiously.
diligence. You're like, if the US government is using them,
Yeah,
darn, I think I can do it too.
right. And then you come to discover, and this is still hypothetical, so I don't want to throw people under the bus here, but it looks like from what we've begun to see that, SolarWinds security wasn't quite up to what you would hope it would be. So you're looking at, okay, so how do we, it's challenging enough to understand the security capabilities of let's say our IT vendor, our MSP, that's, that,
Mhm.
okay. Now we got to look down a layer at their supply chain, but ultimately you got to look down a layer below that of their supply chain, et cetera. I mean, you got that whole thing. Um, there's,
Well, I think it also demonstrates, so, a big takeaway that a lot of people have been talking about with solar winds is supply chain management. And the first question is, are you even doing it? Do you have a third party vendor management program? What are the questions that you're asking? Are you ranking by criticality? And criticality is both in criticality to standing up your business, but also criticality from a legal risk perspective. So I might not need this database to stand up my business and operate, but I might have dumped a bunch of social security numbers in that database, which means I might not need it from an operational criticality part, but from a legal risk perspective, that's a very critical system. So do you have an understanding of sort of what people are doing for you? And then the biggest question I get is, how many layers down do I have to go?
mhm,
Do I have to go, I definitely have to go 1 layer down, right? Everyone that I'm engaging with directly, I've got to go 1 layer down. Do I go 2 layers down? Do I go 10 layers down? Because then all of a sudden, all I'm doing is vendor management all day, every day.
that's right.
And that can become, very costly. So, part of that is, what industry do you sit in? Are you in financial? If you're in financial, start digging because you've got to go layers down. If you're in healthcare, dig down because you're in a very sensitive business.
Uh-huh.
But if you're not, then it's again, it's a risk-based approach. I
Mm,
think that in today's world, at least having a conversation with your initial vendor as to, are you using any software by a third party? Are you using any open source code? Are you using all closed source code? Are you developing this stuff in-house? Are you on an AWS server? Is it stored in the United States, et cetera? You've got to be asking those questions. And then anything that pops up that is unique or different that you go, oh, you know what, I haven't heard that, or that's really like we don't want open source code used in any of our solutions, or you're using a server that is located somewhere that I can't accept. Then you delve further down that chain.
mhm,
But you really have got to ask those questions. And I think supply chain management is one of the hardest things that companies do And guess what? We're all built on this matrix, and it's increasingly becoming like I'm 5 degrees separated from your business because we're probably built on Google or Microsoft. We're probably built on an AWS server somewhere.
Mhm.
Somebody, it's like all these like intricacies, and it can become very confusing, but you have to follow that a little bit to understand the true picture of your risk.
Yeah. So when you're talking with clients and you're just getting into the conversations this way, to what extent, when they say, "Oh, we're using AWS," or "Oh, we're using Office 365," or whatever the platform is, whatever it
Mhm.
is, therefore they're taking care of security. How common is that myth?
Very common.
Okay.
And frankly, part of it is because the companies that you named and many others have very good marketing departments that say that they are both secure and private infrastructure. And I'm not saying that they aren't, but what I think is not understood is that all of those platforms and most platforms out there take what I would say is this mutual responsibility approach, meaning you can certainly make our platform secure, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it for you or that it's default set to security and privacy.
Yeah.
So I think a great example of this is both on G Suite and Microsoft 365, two-factor authentication is available for every user, but you have to turn it on,
Hmm.
right? And so if you don't turn it on, that's on you because Microsoft has said to you, you have to go through and turn all your settings to what you believe your legal obligations are. We provide that to you. And frankly, they provide it for free, but they haven't turned it on. So
Hmm.
I think that it's partially, we want to believe like, well, if Microsoft is doing it, I've got to believe that, they're doing the right thing. And they are probably, but there's a lot that you as a user have to understand and make sure that you're turning on. And then there's also, and I can't fault companies for having this position, if I review Microsoft's contract and I flag aspects of it that have concern for me, I'm using Microsoft as an example. If I review a large tech company contract, there's this feeling that you can't negotiate. It's a take it or leave it type of relationship.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because I think that when you disagree with the legal position that a company is taking, and yet we have very few companies on the market that we can necessarily go and sort of, if you're a startup, unless you're going to create your own server and host your own email on your own domain, like all of these factors, which for most startup companies is just not, it's not even something they can do now.
Hmm.
It's really a hard position to be in because you're kind of forced into accepting environments and risks and legal obligations that you probably just aren't even prepared to take on. But I do think there's a huge myth out there that by using a quote unquote big name, you're going to have that security and privacy of that big name. And it's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is the same slide. We've just changed the headline. What are the privacy and challenging of challenges? I'm going to leave it with, or started off with a question from one of the attendees. What advice do you have for small businesses that don't necessarily have to comply with certain regulations like CCPA, CPRA, and so on, and are somewhat resistant to that? What do you say to the small businesses that just we don't want to go there? That's, it's too much money, it's too many resources.
Pandora's box. We don't want to open
Oops,
it,
I just something.
I'll
I,
let you get that up, but I can start answering it.
yeah.
So that's a challenge. So the first question I would say is, are you truly not implicated by the regulation? I often find that small companies want to believe that they're not impacted by regulation, but in fact might have some regulatory obligations. CCPA, as the question sort of phrased, generally doesn't really impact a business unless it rises to a certain level. So it's $25 million in annual revenue, 50,000 pieces of consumer household device data, or 50% or more of your revenue is derived from the sale of data. So generally, if you're a smaller company, you're probably not going to hit those numbers, or at least not hit those numbers in the short term. But things like GDPR doesn't have a small business carve out. So if you are doing business in Europe, or if you're processing data for a business doing business in Europe, you need to do a real assessment to see if GDPR impacts you. Now, that being said, I think that there's a couple of things to be aware of. One is a lot of small businesses may not themselves be impacted by the regulations, but if you go and look at your contracts, you probably have agreed to some standard or regulation in your contracts. And this is the most common way that we see small to medium-sized businesses getting impacted by these regulations. You signed a data processing agreement saying you're going to comply with the GDPR, or you signed an agreement saying you're doing ISO 27001, or you signed an agreement that said that you are following NIST cybersecurity or privacy framework. So my first thing for small businesses is let's do a review of your contracts. Have you contractually agreed to be following any of these regulations or frameworks? And the other thing to mention, we haven't really talked about the FTC, but the FTC has jurisdiction regardless of your size. So you could be a one-person company, you could be a million, billion person company. And the FTC has authority to come in and regulate you if you're found to have unfair or deceptive trade practices. Now, it is true, the FTC is typically going for bigger opportunities, I'll say. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't be in some way assessed by the FTC, come in front of them, et cetera. We've certainly seen small companies that have gotten warning letters from the FTC. Usually those small companies will take the position of very quickly addressing whatever is raised because you don't want to get into an FCT regulatory proceeding. But I've certainly had and seen small companies that do get the regulatory eye placed on them. So, my advice to small companies is typically to start small and just slowly start to address security and privacy. I think one of the challenges that I see in this space is that everybody wants to buy the very expensive widget that's going to fix it all. First of all, there is no magic pill that's going to fix your security and privacy, partially because each organization is so unique and different. The way I use a system is different than the way Stan uses it. It's different than the way everybody else on this program uses it. But I think starting small by even just opening up a Word document and saying, what would we do if we couldn't access our email today? Did we have a brain exercise on that? Have we thought about what that would look like? Looking at your insurance coverage. Are we covered for cyber incidents? Are we covered for privacy incidents? Starting a conversation of like, what data do we even have in our systems? Because all of that is going to be valuable information that can help you to, one, assess your regulatory obligations, and then two, determine sort of a path forward. And it's really about creating an organic path to move yourself more towards security and privacy maturity. Rome wasn't built in a day. These programs take a long time. It's a lot of cultural change, but it's sort of creating a plan and then executing on that plan. And maybe the goal is in 5 years, we're going to look like X, and we're going to take 5 years to get there. Do you have risk in waiting 5 years? You certainly do, but it's probably going to extend out the cost. It's going to help to alleviate some of the acute sort of tensions that you're going to have as you build this out. And I think that's certainly a defensible position to take. But the biggest fear I have for small businesses is that they feel like this is so much, they just ignore it until something happens. And then once something happens, it's very hard to peel back and really secure your system to ensure that you don't have legal liability, and to make sure that you're mitigating risk. So it's slow. It's starting to have the conversation, even if it's once a quarter. You and your management team sits down and says, "All right, what are you all seeing? Are people locking their computers? Are people putting their laptops in their car and going to the gym?" These are really low-hanging fruit that doesn't take me, doesn't take Stan. It's just sitting there and thinking, I don't really want my laptop sitting in a car while someone goes for a run. Okay, we're going to make a policy around that.
Right. No, I think you and I are so much on the same page here. That, I mean, from our perspective, again, we're on the practitioner side, not the legal side. But it's the same. It's let's get leadership in place. Somebody at an executive level has got to be responsible, accountable, et cetera, for information security
Right.
and for privacy. Leadership and management. Get some policies, around what you're doing, base them on NIST and CIS 20 and, real formal frameworks like that. And then just go to work once a month, once a quarter, get a cadence, start
Right.
meeting, where are we? where do we need to go? Where do we want to go? What can we afford to do in the next short term? What is, if it's going to be 5 years, it'll be 5 years. Same thing.
And Stan, one thing I just want to pick up before we go to the question is something you said that's really important to understand. There's doing the right thing, and then there's documenting that you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the regulations, the law requires you to document it, right? So it is great that you're doing it, but if I can't prove it, that's going to be really hard for me to defend you and what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying document down to, we open the computer and we do X and Y, Z. Document expectations, start really broad. We expect our employees to take security and privacy into consideration in the development of any new products, right? That right there sets expectations. That's a policy. Obviously, if you're in the pharma space or you're in financial, policies have very strict connotations, et cetera. But if you're outside of that space, start somewhere, start with a BYOD policy. I like to call it a bring your own disaster. It's also called a bring your own device policy. But what do you expect your employees to do if they're using their own computer to access your system? And you can sit down and say, well, we do feel comfortable with them doing it, or we don't feel comfortable with them doing this. But you've got to document it. That is really a key. And that is where I think the biggest gap for most companies is. You're generally probably doing the right thing. You might have some bad architecture in your back end, or you might have some gaps and some holes, but you're generally saying like, we're not going to email out social security numbers. We're not, you're generally like doing the right thing. You just don't have it documented. And in this space, from my perspective, you've got to write it down.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, we've worked, and now I'm putting on my Miller Kaplan hat, not the Secure the Village hat, if you will, in terms of what we deliver and do with our clients. We've reduced security. We have a standard set of policies and standards we license to clients. Policies are all of a page. We have legal and moral ethical responsibility to protect this information. We are going to protect it. We're going to have a security manager. Users have to do this. IT has to do that. Policies are done. We're through. Now we get onto standards, and we got a couple of hundred standards. I mean, but you get the standards done as you get the standards done. It's all about now, how do we move forward? And to your point, make sure we're documenting stuff. If you're going to do a training program on awareness training, get the names and of all the people attending, so you can document that you've done it. Show the vulnerability scans whether it's every month or every quarter that you're doing them. So that you get that. What do you say to management when they think, oh, this is an IT problem, they're taking care of it?
So in some ways, this is where the regulations help, because they're not very technical, right? The regulations generally on the technical side are like, use reasonable security and privacy, right? I mean, I think the term that's used in GDPR is state of the art security and privacy that meets the risk level of whatever it is that you're doing, right? So that's a very vague standard. I like to start with, do you use email? I ask them, does every department use email? Does every email have someone's name on it? Does every email have some type of content or data in it? And when you start to say that, you say, okay, so every department has privacy concerns. So is tech expected to know what every department is doing from a privacy perspective? And you sort of step them through why this is very much every single business unit's problem. And actually, I'm going to take that back, not the word problem. This is every business unit's challenge to meet. And I really think we need to get away from this idea that we're going to create this IT department and this cybersecurity department, and they're going to deal with it all. I think what we actually need is a cybersecurity liaison in each business unit that's going to constantly be driving home the cyber message. Are we taking cyber and privacy into consideration? Are we thinking about the risks if we change from this platform to this platform, if we develop this system or this system, and really bringing it home? Because when the units own their own cyber threats and vulnerabilities, they're going to take it much more seriously, because it should be against their bottom line if we have to pay for something, right? And that's how you start to tie it to profit. That's how you start to tie those resources. So I think we need to get away from this idea that we're going to have this cyber unit that's going to be this like lord over all things. It's like becomes the no team, right? We're going to go to cyber and they're going to tell us, no, we can't do that. That's not true. Cyber should be working hand in hand with the profit units to determine how can we do this in a way that's not going to expose us to additional liability and risk. And I think that is a shift in how we have thought to develop cyber resources at companies. And that's like, you still need to have that collaboration with those cyber professionals, but if they're each sort of liaisoning with these business units, it really gets the entire organization involved in meeting the cyber and privacy challenges.
Yeah, no, that, and again, that's very consistent with kind of our way we think through this. We look to, with our clients, create a team headed by the security manager, CISO, however title, but a team that's cross-functional. It touches everybody in the company ultimately, and they have the leadership responsibility here to get all the I's dotted and T's crossed, so to speak. So let's go on to the next slide, which again is very much like the last slide.
The
But
theme.
it changes we're asking a very specific question here, and what the heck, and I applaud you for being polite in your language. How am I supposed to create a workable solution in all of this? Like, where do you start? What do you do? Blah, 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 all of that stuff.
Yeah, and so the biggest challenge I see from a legal perspective in 2021, and this is a challenge we've had for a couple of years, is that the law is not static. It's very much in flux. We had GDPR go into the books in 2018. We had CCPA went into effect just about a year ago in 2020. We have the California Privacy Rights Act that was voted in by ballot initiative in November. We have the New York Shield Act that went into effect of March of 2020. We have New York just introduced biometric data laws. We have Illinois' biometric data laws. I mean, and that's just what I checked on Twitter this morning. I have no idea what happened during our call, and like everything could have changed.
That's right.
So, I think and I didn't even mention, like, Brazil has their own GDPR type law. Canada is updating PIPEDA to reflect GDPR, et cetera. And so you could almost feel paralyzed because you're like, well, why would I start now if the law is so in flux? And so I think the biggest takeaway that companies should have is that, yes, while we're still figuring out the law, it is somewhat in flux. A lot of them are built on really core privacy principles. You can go all the way back to the 1970s and the Fair Information Privacy Principles, the FIPS. And you can see there's a lot of very similar terminology that's being used. You need to have accountability. You need to have transparency. You need to have a lawful basis to protect, to collect data. Why do you have a lawful way of having that information? All of those things are core privacy principles that you can start to build into your security and privacy infrastructure, that it's not going to change, right? We're not going to see the concept of consent is going to be a concept that we have to struggle with. How we get that consent, the phraseology might have to be tweaked, but the way that we view data in our systems, that is pretty well set, at least from an international perspective. I think the big outstanding question is, are we going to get a federal US privacy law? If I had a magic 8-ball and knew the answer, I would tell you all, but I think we're going to get something. What that something looks like is going to be very, it's a large unknown. The big questions for me is it going to preempt state law, or are we still going to have state law that's going to be in play? I think it's going to set a floor, which means 30 to 35 states are going to probably be whatever the federal law is. And then we're going to have our states that always tweak the federal law, probably still have some tweaks. So California, New York, Massachusetts, just a few to name them. And then the big question too is there going to be a private right of action under a federal law? And that's the real scary part for businesses. Just a little bit on the private right of action, the California Consumer Privacy Act created a private right of action in the cyber breach context. So not in the privacy breach context as it's expressly stated in the law, but in the cyber breach context, which means that if you suffer a cyber breach and individuals' data is harmed, or individuals are harmed themselves, then they can file a lawsuit for a private right of action, which creates a very large potential amount of liability, especially in the class action space. In the US, it is not in every state can you even bring a lawsuit against a company for a cyber breach. So the CCPA expressly stating you have a statutory private right of action was a very big deal. And from a business's perspective, there's a fear that extending that to the privacy realm really could create this floodgate of lawsuits against businesses, especially when a large portion of businesses really are struggling to even wrap their head around privacy, to then face a very significant amount of liability for it, is very daunting. And so that's a big outstanding question. I think that um, it's going to be highly debated with a new administration going in. That's going to probably have more of a focus on a consumer perspective. We might see something end up being adopted, but it's definitely an unknown. I don't think it's an unknown though that should halt your progress towards privacy and security, because I think we have some pretty good baseline models that we can use to develop the programs. And once you get that foundation in, tweaking is much easier than building from scratch.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, we've done is, looking at, and again, it goes to the CCPA with its private right of action, uh, raised the subject of one needs reasonable security practices as a get out of jail free card if information's been that you're holding has been breached. But it begs the question of what is reasonable. And we at Secure
Yes.
the Village have built, and this goes back now a couple of years when we could see this coming, uh, at least defining what's a minimum level below which you're not reasonable. Again, assuming you're big enough to be covered by CCPA. So you're talking either a lot of data or 25 million or more in sales that way. I don't know how that translates to New York stuff and all, but just what do you have to do to just get in the ballpark, be on the playing field of this is potentially reasonable? And then it gets to what we talked about earlier about are your practices then at least defendable should something happen? But we see that floor being there as a place to start, no matter however these laws evolve and change and whatever. We also have a webinar on this that we did last October that's available on our website for anybody who's any attendees who might want to go see that. Uh, on the supply chain side, do you see things like CMMC, the Defense Department Certified Maturity Model, Capability Maturity Model certification, moving over out of DoD and providing a mechanism for this kind of management up and down the supply chain?
So that's an interesting question. I'm very familiar with the CMMC, and I think so. We often see on the defense side really is where they push a lot of this security for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I can see it being used somewhat as a model, but I don't always see DoD standards transitioning fully into the private sector, especially for small to medium-sized businesses. You really got to be around that DoD world for it to really impact you. I don't know if we'll see it push out. That being said, so many companies are just looking for anything that they can use in the supply chain management that it might be something that the private sector grasps onto. I see more in the private sector the increasing use of these sort of third parties that almost act as like a vendor repository of data, where the vendor sends all the data there, they do their due diligence, they give a score, and then the enterprise just uses that information that's provided. I see that probably being a way that a lot of companies are going. I caution the use of those companies. I think there's a value for some areas and some vendor due diligence. I think that this is one area where you've got to be a little bit more vigilant as to what data you're giving them, what access you're giving them to the system, and you really can't rely on a third party to know that level of detail of like the risk of that vendor to you.
Yeah, good answer. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I want to segue a bit and just bring current political reality, if you will, into the discussion. I mean, we saw the insurrection last week in Washington. I think it's not unreasonable. Let me turn that around. I think it's reasonable to expect ongoing disruption hopefully it'll stay out of physical space, but I'm not sanguine that that will happen either. But certainly I see more of it happening in cyberspace, and particularly I'm concerned. I'm curious what your thoughts are about organizations, websites that of organizations that are associated with the liberal left, if you will.
Mhm.
The Southern Poverty Law Center, as an example, the American Civil Liberties Union, LGBTQ uh, supportive websites, and so on. Uh, should those organizations really step up their security and privacy right now? And what would you recommend they do?
Yeah, so the last week has been very interesting from a security and privacy standpoint. I think it's even been interesting from a technology standpoint. I mean, having these technology platforms take active measures to terminate accounts, to terminate businesses' ability to use them. I mean, I'm thinking of the Parler AWS dispute that's going on right now. It raises a lot of questions as to who do we want making those decisions, what are the rights of individuals in a digital space. We don't really have a baseline for that. We have a lot of freedom of speech rights, which is what a lot of individuals have relied on in the digital space to continue to use certain platforms. But so I think there's a lot of really interesting movements going on. If you are in a politically sensitive area, and this is across the board, left, middle, right, etc., I think you really do need to be taking your security very seriously. You're a target as low-hanging fruit to get into other organizations. You're a target in and of it yourself. And I think there's really good, especially in nonprofit world, there's really good free services that can help you to address your security and privacy, and to be putting together those checklists. One of the biggest things I see in those spaces is that they use a lot of personal Gmail, at yahoo.com, et cetera, accounts. And, recognizing resources are strapped, I still think there's a value to purchasing sort of a domain and being able to control that environment, control your data. You're also dealing with a lot of sensitive data. People are trusting you to maintain their privacy. You have lists of people who have said they're interested in following you. Those lists themselves can become targets. So I do think that there should be an extra vigilance for anyone that is in a more profiled space. I'm not saying that means go and spend $1 million on your security, but everybody on your team should have two-factor on their email. I think we all learned that lesson in this space a couple of years ago. Everybody in your team should be very aware not to click on any links that are sent in, even in their internal team. Everyone on the team should have secure and unique passwords. The best advice I can say other than two-factor is get a password manager. They're generally pretty affordable. They're very valuable. And I think those two steps can drastically increase your security. And then limit access to core areas of your business. Does everyone need access to the website? If not, then only give access to who absolutely needs it.
Yeah, no, those are good suggestions. I would add to it as well. Just take real care. If you got on IT infrastructure, you're not all in the cloud. Take real care that it's properly architected. Things like that on the technology side. Jordan, this has been great. Wonderful discussion. I want to move on. Okay, so what are we going to do? What else is on our calendar, so to speak? A couple of things I've highlighted in yellow. Next month's information security webinar. You and I, Jordan, talked a bit about the small business. Next month is all about the small business. My guest will be Craig Moss of the Cyber Readiness Institute. And the Cyber Readiness Institute their focus is how do we help the SMB? I'm on their leadership advisory board, and they do just phenomenal work. And as I say, Craig is going to be our speaker next month. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we have our Invitational Cybersecurity Workforce Working Group. The next meeting of that is Tuesday, the 19th. If you've got an apprentice program, intern program, or you want those things or whatever, just let us know. We want to invite, the more the merrier, if you will. One of the things one of our partners is doing is a webinar on the 19th I want to call special attention to as well. This is on cyberbullying. we haven't talked about that at all, but it's a big challenge. We got started in this as one of our board members' daughters found herself a victim of cyberbullying. And so the father, is very interested in this topic, and this is now our second. As you can see, we've got Financial Services Cybersecurity Roundtable. That's a monthly group, meets on Fridays. We've got our Technology and Security Management Happy Hour. Di Kriebel, who's co-hosts that with me, is one of our attendees at today's webinar, and we'll be talking about SolarWinds at that one. We've got Chris Taylor of the ME ISAC to talk to us about that. Another partner of ours, the Digital Directors Network. If you play up at the board level, this is one you want to be interested in. Bob Zukas runs that program, and our board member Steve Krantz and his ongoing series of webinars. Doing it online is one, and the other is doing it securely online, being the other. So please join us at our monthly webinars. Beyond that, we also have our News of the Week that comes out every Sunday afternoon. We're now in our 11th year. It started back when there was Citadel, which is now, of course, Miller Kaplan, and as part of that whole situation, the Secure the Village has taken over that newsletter. So please feel free to sign up for that. Beyond that, we've got a brand new website. We're now live. It's designed around making it easy for people to come. What is it you want to do? You want to attend an event? Click that button. You want to learn? Click that button. You go to our library of resources. This webinar will be on that library by the early part of next week. We'll get that there. Or if you want to connect to people, click the connect button. That brings you to the Village Square. Jordan, you're on it. By the end of the month, we expect to have 100 cyber partners, cyber leaders on that website. So, on our Connect thing. So please, visit the new website. Just browse through the library. A lot of information already we've got there. Beyond that, other things you can do. Steve Krantz, I already mentioned, has a book, Cyber Guardian, a Secure the Village Guide for Residents. And we're in the design stage of putting together an Android iPhone app for residents to keep track of their own security. So certainly do that. Be a cyber guardian. We have on our new website, you can take a pledge, sign up, it gets you the newsletter, gets you a digital badge, etc. Beyond that, I just want to shout out, I'm also an author now, having nothing to do with security of the kind we've been talking about, but security of the democracy, if you will. And at these times, this is certainly such a relevant subject. It's on Amazon, The Agnostic Patriot. As these are essays that I wrote starting back after the Thanksgiving following 9/11, when I started looking for what was I thankful for that year. Ultimately, the soul of America, I find in the clause in the Declaration that we're all created equal, and in the preamble to the Constitution, we the people. So I call that out to you. Beyond that, here's some contact information. I'll leave this slide up for the rest of the broadcast. Jordan, thank you again. Any final words?
No, I'm always happy to connect. Please feel free to reach out, email, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm prolific on all of those. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation. Always looking for ways to work with others in the community, either through volunteer opportunities or other ways. So please feel free to reach out and stay connected.
Great. Well, thank you. One last question. How do you sign up for the Tuesday Cyber Bully event? You sign up for all events, go to the website, find the event you're interested in, sign up for it, and that gets you on. I think we're done. I just shut down the screen so I can get the rest of my, yep, there we go. All the control panel stuff changes when you're sharing screen. So thank you, Jordan. Again, I'm grateful for you spending your time with us, and I look forward to more of these. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.